Hi there, and welcome to this lesson. In this lesson, we'll be learning about quadratic equations, okay? And we would be learning to solve quadratic equations by method of factorization. Now, as the lesson progresses, if you have any issues at all, anything comes up as unclear, please feel free to get in touch, okay? We would be more than happy to help. Now, let's jump right into the lesson. So quadratic equations factorization. Now, what exactly are quadratic equations? To understand quadratic equations, we need to know what quadratic expressions are. And a quadratic expression is an algebraic expression of the form ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c are constants, i.e. numbers. Okay, so examples, we have x squared plus 3x minus 4 of x squared minus 7x plus 11. If you look closely, you'd find that a quadratic equation contains a single variable, okay, and you have a mix of the first order and the second order. So basically you have the second order x squared, and you have the first order 3x, and you often have a number as well, okay. But you do have quadratic equations that come in this form. So you can have a quadratic equation that doesn't, a quadratic expression without the number on the end, okay. So you have something like this, x squared minus 5x, or you have 3x squared minus 13. So in this case there isn't an x term. This is still a quadratic expression. Basically the emphasis is on the x squared, okay. If you take out that x squared, it stops being, it's no longer a quadratic expression. So when a quadratic expression is equated to a constant, it becomes a quadratic equation. So basically, if I equate x squared plus 3x minus 4 to 7, it becomes a quadratic equation. If I did the same for x squared minus 7x plus 11 and I equated it to 2, it becomes a quadratic equation. Now, solving quadratic equations. So if you're looking to solve x squared plus 3x minus 4 equals 7, okay, the first thing you want to do is you want to see that that equation is equated to 0. So if you have x squared plus 3x minus 4 equals 7, you need to move that 7 over to the left and make it x squared plus 3x minus 11 equals 0. Now this is a solvable quadratic equation. Similarly, if you have x squared minus 7x plus 11 equals 2, basically you move that 2 over to the left and you have x squared minus 7x plus 9 equals 0. This is a solvable quadratic equation. Now, there are three methods for solving quadratic equations, and these are the factorization method that we would be discussing in this lesson, the completing the square method, and the formula method. All right, and now we'll just go ahead and talk about the factorization method. So the factorization method, what is this about? Now consider the expansion of the algebraic expression, okay. I'd like you to pay very close attention now, and then basically we have x minus 3 multiplying x minus 4, okay. And if we're looking to expand this, basically we just say x multiplying x minus 4 and minus 3 multiplying x minus 4. And then when you expand that out, you end up with x squared minus 4x minus 3x plus 12, and we have x squared minus 7x plus 12. Have you noticed it? We have a quadratic expression at the end. Okay, now what I'm going to do, basically this is expansion, and I told you the reverse process is factorization. I'm just going to write this exactly backwards. All right, so we have factorizing this expression, x squared minus 7x plus 12. We go one step back and we have x squared minus 4x minus 3x plus 12, and we have that x minus 4 minus 3x minus 4, and we end up back with x minus 3x minus 4. Now this is the basis of solving quadratic equations using the factorization method. Now consider the quadratic equation x squared minus 7x plus 12 equals 0. Okay, now we've already established that x squared minus 7x plus 12 is x minus 3x minus 4. x minus 3 multiplying x minus 4. So if we had a quadratic equation x squared minus 7x plus 12 equals 0, I believe you'd agree with me that we could write that out as x minus 3 multiplying x minus 4 equals 0. Now, here's something else to consider. If you multiply 2 by 0, you have 0. And if you multiply 0 by 2, you have 0. But if you have 2 times 4 or 7 times 5 or 5 times 11, you can never get a product 0. The only way you will multiply two things to give you an answer 0 is if one of the numbers you're multiplying is 0. Okay? And basically, if we were to apply this to solving this quadratic equation, at this point we're at x minus 3 multiplying x minus 4 equals 0. We want to apply what we just learned to solving this. I believe you would agree with me that the only way x minus 3 multiplying x minus 4 gives you 0 is if x minus 3 was 0 or x minus 4 was 0. Okay, so basically we have x minus 3 0, we solve that and we have x equals 3, or x minus 4 equals 0 and we have x equals 4. And basically we have a solution to x squared minus 7x plus 12 equals 0 as x equals 3 or x equals 4. Let's go over it again. So we have a very simple expansion process. We have x minus 3 multiplying x minus 4, and when we expand that out, we end up with x squared minus 7x plus 12, a quadratic expression. Now, if we reverse that quadratic expression, basically factorizing it, going back, we get back to x minus 3 multiplying x minus 4. Now, if you had a quadratic equation x squared minus 7x plus 12, you can express that as x squared minus 7x plus 12 equals 0. You can write that out as x minus 3 multiplying x minus 4 equals 0. And now we found that the only way you would ever get a result 0 by multiplying two numbers or two terms is if one of them was 0. Okay, so basically if x minus 3 x minus 4 equals 0, the only way that works is if x minus 3 is 0 or x minus 4 is 0. And when you solve those out, x minus 3 equals 0, you have that x equals 3, and x minus 4 equals 0, you have that x equals 4. And that is it. That is how we solve quadratic equations by a method of factorization. Now, I want you to take note of something before we move on. Now basically factorizing the expression x squared minus 7x plus 12, the first thing we did there is that we split the middle term minus 7x into two terms. Okay, so minus 7x became minus 4x and minus 3x. And generally when you're looking to solve quadratic equations by method of factorization, that's the first thing you do. But now let's go ahead and solve some examples. Now example 1. And example 1 says by method of factorization, solve the quadratic equation x squared minus x minus 6 equals 0. And like I said, the first thing we want to do is we want to split that middle term minus x, okay? We have minus x in this case, and we want to split that middle term into two terms, okay? I'm going to show you how you do that now. The first thing we do to achieve that is we multiply the first and last term, okay? Stay with me now. Multiply the first and last term. So in this case, the first term is x squared and the last term is minus 6. So we're going to say minus 6 times x squared gives you minus 6x squared. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to list out the factors of minus 6x squared. Okay, basically the factors of minus 6x squared, i.e. smaller terms that can divide minus 6x squared. I tell you the factors are x, okay, x can divide minus 6x squared. We have x, 2x, 3x, 6x, the negative factors as well, minus x, minus 2x, minus 3x, and minus 6x. So these are the terms that can divide minus 6x squared. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to find a pair from these terms, okay? So a pair from these terms that we would multiply to give minus 6x squared, and when we add them up we get the middle term minus x. Okay, so out of these factors of minus 6x squared, we're looking for two terms that when we multiply them, they give us minus 6x squared. And when we add them up together, they give us that middle term, minus x. Okay, and basically I tell you those two terms are minus 3x and 2x. Because when you add them together, minus 3x plus 2x, you have minus x. And when you multiply them, you have minus 3x multiplied by 2x, you have minus 6x squared. Now, we have our equation x squared minus x minus 6 equals 0, and we've already established that minus 3x plus 2x equals minus x. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put minus 3x plus 2x for minus x in the equation. So our equation becomes x squared minus 3x plus 2x minus 6 equals 0. And if you look, we have successfully split minus x into two terms. And we did that by first multiplying the first and last terms, okay, and give us a result. Now finding the factors of that result, all right, and then looking through those factors for a pair that we would multiply to give us minus 6x squared, and we add them up to give minus x. Okay, and we found that pair and we replace minus x with the sum of that pair. Now once we've done that, we just go ahead and group. Okay, so we have four terms in our equation now, and we just go ahead and group. So we have the first group x squared minus 3x, and the second 2x minus 6 and 2x minus 6. Okay, and we factorize. I think we can factorize the first group x squared minus 3x using x, and we have x minus 3, and we factorize the second group using 2, and we have 2x minus 3. And right now we can go ahead and factorize using x minus 3, and we end up with x minus 3 multiplying x plus 2 equals 0. Okay, so I think we've arrived at a pretty safe point, and from this point I'm sure you know exactly what we go ahead and do now. So we have two products and the result is 0. The only way that happens is if one of them is 0. So we have either x plus 2 equals 0, x equals minus 2, or x minus 3 equals 0, x equals 3. So our result, if you solve the quadratic equation x squared minus x minus 6 equals 0, you get the result x equals minus 2 and x equals 3, or x equals 3. And I tell you, if you put those results back into your question there, I think let's go ahead and do that. Let's use x equals 3. So basically you'd have 3 squared minus 3 minus 6, and basically you end up with 9 minus 3 minus 6, and 9 minus 3 minus 6 is 0. Okay, so yeah, let's do another example. Example 2. Example 2 says, by method of factorization, solve the quadratic equation 2x squared plus 7x plus 3 equals 0. Simple. First thing we want to do, multiply first and last term. 3 times 2x squared gives you 6x squared. Then you want to list out the factors of 6x squared. Okay, so x, 2x, 3x, 6x, the negative factors as well. Okay, minus x, minus 2x, minus 3x, and minus 6x. Okay, very careful. Basically, for a term like 6x squared, you also list out the negative factor. You always list out the positive and negative factors, regardless of whether or not the actual term you have there is positive or negative. So from those factors, we're going to look for two factors that will add to get our middle term there, 7x, okay, because we're looking to split 7x, and we will multiply them, we get 6x squared. Can you think of two terms out of our factors that when we multiply them, we get 6x squared, and when we add them up, we get 7x? I tell you, those two factors are 6x and x. Okay, because when you multiply 6x and x, you get 6x squared, and when you add them up, you get 7x. So now that we have that, we just go ahead and replace 7x with 6x plus x. Okay, so we've successfully split 7x into two terms, 6x and x, and then we just go ahead and group. So we have two groups. We're going to factorize those two groups, and we'll factorize the first bit, and we have 2x multiplying x plus 3. And the second part is basically this we really can't reduce that, but we generally always have to factorize. So when you have when you're faced with a situation like this, you factorize using 1. Okay, so x plus 3, you can't factorize with anything, and you just go ahead and say 1 multiplying x plus 3. And then from this point, we can factorize using x plus 3, and we end up with 2x plus 1 multiplying x plus 3 equals 0. And then step 5, if 2x plus 1 equal multiplying 2x plus 3 equals 0, it should tell us that either 2x plus 1 is 0, and we have that x equals minus 1 over 2, or x plus 3 equals 0, and when you solve that, you have x equals minus 3. And that is how you solve a quadratic equation by method of factorization. Bye for now.